disappear. No tears for black girls, like they were never here. But we remember, we'll speak their names.
A 21-year-old student was found hanging from a tree in Cleveland, Mississippi. It's at a university called Delta State University in Cleveland. They found him early in the morning, about 7 o'clock, hanging from a tree. They're saying at this point there's no foul play, but folks are calling for investigations. And I think they need to get to the bottom. This guy's name is Demartravion Trey Reed. He's from Grenada, Mississippi. Everyone they spoke to said he was a great guy. He lit up a room. And so why was he hanging from a tree? What happened? That's what we need to know, whether it's foul play or not.
Forget all the Charlie Kirk situation right now. Let's go down to Mississippi. The name Trayvon Reed needs to ring all over the United States right now. 1, that is my cousin. 2, this is the second incident that has occurred within the last 5 years at this campus. Delta State University has had a run-in with me and their policemen. They tried to lock me up for no reason, and it didn't succeed in their favor. I went on a 9-month probation, and that's it. This year, just today, it was reported that my cousin was found hanging from a tree, and they trying to rule it as a suicide. Now, I just got off the phone with one of my cousins. She said she seen the reports, and it said that he was beaten and bruised. Both his arms was broken, and he had a broken leg. I'm gonna let y'all do the math. Now, this school has history for being racist. Even going all the way back to the 1980 situation that happened with the sit-in. I love to refer to that situation because that was one of the significant situations that happened with one of the black revolts that happened at this school. But still, I'm trying to be composed in this video, and I'm trying to keep it all together. But it's a lot of shit that happens on that campus that don't nobody do shit about. It was incidents before my incidents. My big incident happened and that I reported that nobody did nothing about. Somebody tried to report me for a hate crime, and they was the one being homophobic, transphobic, and being racist. And they was trying to lock me up until I had multiple people come out and speak against him. There was an incident that I reported that it was a group of white students in a white truck while I was a freshman. They yelled at me and my friends and called us a bunch of monkeys. Please do a deep dive on this. Please, 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 please do your research on this. Do not let them sweep nothing else under the rug. Enough is enough. It is 2025 and bullshit after bullshit after bullshit is still getting fed to us. Enough is enough. We gotta wrap it up.
The morning mist clung to the Delta State University campus like a shroud, thick and suffocating in the September heat. At 7:05 a.m. on Monday, September 15th, 2025, the silence was shattered by a discovery that would echo through the corridors of justice for months to come. A faculty member, making their routine walk across the central campus near the pickleball courts, found what would become one of Mississippi's most controversial deaths in decades. Hanging from an ancient oak tree, in full view of anyone passing through the heart of the university, was the lifeless body of Demartravion Trey Reed, 21 years old, black. A first-year student who had been on campus for barely a month. His body swayed gently in the morning breeze, a grotesque pendulum marking time in a state where such scenes carried the weight of centuries of racial terror. But this wasn't 1955. This was 2025, in an America that claimed to have moved beyond its darkest chapters. Yet here, in Cleveland, Mississippi, a town whose very name seemed to mock the promise of progress, another young black man was found hanging from a tree. The symbolism was impossible to ignore, the timing too convenient to dismiss as mere coincidence. Just 5 days earlier, on September 10th, Charlie Kirk had been gunned down at Utah Valley University. Kirk, the 31-year-old founder of Turning Point USA, had spent his career building a conservative youth movement that critics argued was little more than a pipeline for white supremacist ideology dressed in patriotic rhetoric. His assassination had sent shockwaves through the far-right ecosystem he had helped create, with his widow Erica Kirk declaring that her tears would be battle cries, war terminology that seemed to promise retaliation. Within hours of Kirk's death, Turning Point USA reported receiving over 13,000 new chapter requests. The organization already boasted 9,000 college chapters and 4,000 high school chapters. What were these people gearing up for? The answer may have come in the form of Trey Reed's lifeless body. The family's last conversation with Trey painted a picture of a young man excited about his future. His mother had spoken to him on Friday, September 13th, just 3 days before his death. He was enthusiastic about attending Delta State University, looking forward to his classes, embracing the college experience that so many young people dream of. This wasn't a young man on the edge of despair. This was someone with everything to live for. Yet by Monday morning, he was dead, hanging from a tree in the most public part of campus, where every student walking to class would see him. The location was crucial, not some remote corner where someone contemplating suicide might seek privacy, but the central campus near the pickleball courts, a high-traffic area where his body would be discovered quickly and seen by many. Delta State University Police Chief Michael Peeler was quick to announce at a press conference that there was no evidence of foul play. The Bolivar County Coroner's Office released a statement claiming that a preliminary examination showed Reed did not suffer any lacerations, contusions, compound fractures, broken bones, or injuries consistent with an assault. But the family wasn't buying it. Neither were civil rights advocates who understood the historical context of black bodies hanging from trees in Mississippi. The NAACP posted an image declaring that a man was lynched yesterday, expressing skepticism about the official narrative. The organization wrote pointedly, "Our people have not historically hung themselves from trees." The family's response spoke volumes about their suspicions. Within 24 hours, they had retained civil rights attorney Ben Crump, the same lawyer who had represented the families of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and countless other victims of racial violence. Crump announced that he would lead a civil rights investigation into Reed's death, working with multiple organizations to conduct a thorough and transparent investigation. Trey Reed was a young man full of promise and warmth, deeply loved and respected by all who knew him, Crump's statement read. His family and the campus community deserve a full, independent investigation to uncover the truth about what happened. We cannot accept vague conclusions when so many questions remain. The family also demanded an independent autopsy, refusing to accept the coroner's preliminary findings. Attorney Vanessa J. Jones, representing the Reed family, made it clear they weren't satisfied with the official narrative. "We will seek answers independently from Delta State University and from the coroner's office," Jones declared. Were there cameras? There should have been cameras at the university that could easily enlighten us to what happened in the early morning of September 15th, 2025. The camera question was crucial. In 2025, virtually every inch of a college campus is under surveillance. If Reed had walked to that tree alone and taken his own life, there would be video evidence. If someone had forced him there, that too would be captured on camera. The family's insistence on seeing this footage suggested they believed it would tell a different story than the one authorities were promoting. But there were other troubling details emerging from the investigation. Reports surfaced that Reed had faced racial incidents on campus before his death. Social media posts alleged that Reed had been locked up at Delta State University and had faced racist violence, citing past incidents of racial bias against him at the university. These allegations painted a picture of a young man under siege, targeted because of his race in an environment that should have been safe. The family described Trey as quiet, light, sweet, and well-mannered. a young man who would give you the world if he could. They had celebrated with him at Grenada Day in his hometown on September 3rd, just 12 days before his death. He was their little quiet light, a beacon of hope and promise in a family that had invested everything in his education and future. The timing of Reed's death was particularly suspicious. His body was discovered on the same day Delta State University was supposed to celebrate its 100th anniversary. Instead of centennial festivities, the campus was plunged into mourning and chaos. Classes were canceled, events were postponed. The symbolism was unmistakable, a young black man's death overshadowing what should have been a day of institutional pride. Mississippi has always been ground zero for America's racial violence. Between 1877 and 1950, the state recorded 581 lynchings, the highest number in the nation. These weren't random acts of violence, but calculated tools of terror designed to enforce Jim Crow laws and keep black communities in constant fear. Lynchings suppressed voting, land ownership, economic independence, and political participation. They were public spectacles, often attended by hundreds of white spectators who posed for photographs with the victims' bodies as if they were at a county fair. Cleveland, Mississippi, sits in the heart of the Delta, a region where cotton fields once stretched to the horizon, worked by enslaved hands, and later by sharecroppers trapped in cycles of debt and violence. The town's history is steeped in the kind of racial terror that made Mississippi synonymous with American apartheid. Delta State University itself was founded in 1925 as Delta State Teachers College, during the height of the Jim Crow era, when separate and unequal was the law of the land. The university has its own troubled history with race. In March 1969, black students staged protests demanding equal treatment and representation. The demonstrations were met with resistance from both the administration and local law enforcement, reflecting the broader struggle for civil rights that was tearing the South apart. Even today, students and faculty report incidents of racial bias, creating an atmosphere where young black men like Trey Reed might feel isolated and vulnerable. The connection to Charlie Kirk's death couldn't be ignored. Kirk had spent his career promoting ideas that many scholars identified as white supremacist ideology wrapped in patriotic language. He had denied the existence of systemic racism, called white privilege a racist idea, and vilified critical race theory as dangerous indoctrination. His organization, Turning Point USA, had been flagged by the Anti-Defamation League as a vast platform for extremists and far-right conspiracy theorists. Kirk's movement had also courted figures openly tied to the far right. Political Research Associates documented cases where TPUSA chapters hosted or aligned with Nick Fuentes and his white nationalist followers. The repeated associations revealed how far Kirk was willing to go in pursuit of influence, creating a network of radicalized young people across American college campuses. Now Kirk was dead, killed by a 22-year-old gunman named Tyler Robinson at a Turning Point USA event. The motive remained unclear, but the impact was immediate. Far-right figures and elected officials called for vengeance. The rhetoric was inflammatory, designed to stoke anger and resentment among Kirk's followers. And then, just 5 days later, Trey Reed was found hanging from a tree in Mississippi. The investigation that followed was marked by the same patterns that had characterized lynching cases for over a century. Authorities were quick to dismiss the possibility of foul play. The coroner's preliminary examination was rushed and superficial. Key evidence, like surveillance footage, was not immediately released to the family or the public. The victim was subtly blamed for his own death, portrayed as someone who had chosen to end his life rather than someone who may have been murdered. But the Reed family refused to accept this narrative. They hired Ben Crump, one of the most prominent civil rights attorneys in America. They demanded an independent autopsy. They called for transparency and accountability. They insisted that their son's death be investigated as thoroughly as any other suspicious death. not dismissed because of his race or the uncomfortable historical parallels it evoked. The family's response was crucial because it broke the cycle of silence and acceptance that had allowed lynching to flourish for so long. In the past, Black families often had no recourse when their loved ones were killed. They couldn't hire attorneys, couldn't demand investigations, couldn't challenge official narratives. They were forced to accept whatever explanation authorities provided, no matter how implausible or incomplete. But in 2025, things were different. The Reed family had resources, connections, and a platform to demand justice. They had allies in the civil rights community who understood the historical significance of their son's death. They had media attention that made it impossible for authorities to simply sweep the case under the rug. The broader context made the situation even more ominous. Mississippi in 2025 was still Mississippi, a state where Confederate monuments dotted the landscape, where voter suppression tactics continued to disenfranchise Black communities, where economic inequality fell largely along racial lines. The Delta region, in particular, remained one of the poorest areas in America, with Black residents bearing the brunt of decades of discriminatory policies and practices. Delta State University, despite its claims of progress and inclusion, existed within this broader context of racial tension and inequality. The university's student body was predominantly white, its faculty and administration even more so. Black students often reported feeling isolated and unwelcome, struggling to find their place in an institution that had been built to exclude them. Into this environment came Trey Reed, a young Black man from Grenada, Mississippi, excited about his college experience and his future. Within a month, he was dead, hanging from a tree in the center of campus. The official explanation, suicide, seemed to ignore everything we know about the historical and contemporary realities of racial violence in Mississippi. Yet the challenges remained enormous. Mississippi's criminal justice system had a long history of failing to prosecute racial violence. Even when cases went to trial, all-white juries often refused to convict white defendants accused of killing Black victims. The culture of impunity that had protected lynchers for generations was still alive and well in many parts of the state. Moreover, the connection to Charlie Kirk's death added another layer of complexity to the case. If Reed's death was indeed retaliation for Kirk's assassination, it represented a new form of racial terrorism, one that used contemporary political grievances to justify age-old patterns of violence. The far-right ecosystem that Kirk had helped create was vast and decentralized, making it difficult to trace specific connections between his death and subsequent acts of violence. But the timing was too convenient to ignore. Kirk's assassination had sent shockwaves through the white supremacist movement he had helped mainstream. His followers were angry, looking for someone to blame, someone to punish. The rhetoric from far-right leaders in the days following Kirk's death had been explicitly violent, calling for vengeance and retribution against their perceived enemies. In this context, a young Black college student like Trey Reed would have been seen as a perfect target, vulnerable, isolated, and symbolically significant. His death would send a message to other Black students, other civil rights advocates, other people who might challenge white supremacist ideology. It would show that the movement Kirk had built was still dangerous, still capable of deadly violence, even after its leader's death. The investigation into Reed's death would ultimately determine whether this theory held water, but the early signs were troubling. Authorities seemed more interested in closing the case quickly than in conducting a thorough investigation. The coroner's preliminary findings were released within hours, before a proper autopsy could be conducted. The university's response was focused on damage control rather than truth-seeking. These patterns were all too familiar to anyone who had studied the history of lynching in America. The rush to judgment, the dismissal of family concerns, the refusal to consider racial motives, the protection of institutional reputations over individual justice. It was as if nothing had changed since the 1950s, despite all the progress that had supposedly been made. But perhaps that was the point. Perhaps Reed's death was meant to remind Black Americans that their safety and security were still conditional, still dependent on white approval and tolerance. Perhaps it was meant to show that the gains of the civil rights movement could be reversed, that the promise of equality was still just that, a promise, not a reality. If so, the message was being received loud and clear. Black students across the country were expressing fear and anxiety about their safety on predominantly white campuses. Parents were questioning whether to send their children to schools in states with histories of racial violence. Civil rights organizations were mobilizing to demand better protection for Black students and more thorough investigations of suspicious deaths. The Reed case had become a test of America's commitment to racial justice in the 21st century. Would authorities conduct a thorough, transparent investigation? Would they consider all possible motives, including racial ones? Would they hold accountable anyone who might have been responsible for Reed's death? Or would they follow the historical pattern of dismissing Black deaths as unimportant, of protecting white institutions and individuals from scrutiny, of allowing racial violence to continue with impunity? The answers to these questions would determine not just the fate of Trey Reed's case, but the broader trajectory of race relations in America. If his death was indeed connected to Charlie Kirk's assassination, it would represent a new chapter in the long history of American racial terrorism, one that used contemporary political movements to justify ancient hatreds. But if the investigation was conducted properly, if the truth was uncovered and justice was served, it might also represent a turning point, a moment when America finally broke free from the cycles of violence and impunity that had defined its racial history for so long. The tree where Trey Reed died still stands in the center of Delta State University's campus. Students walk past it every day, some pausing to leave flowers or say a prayer. It has become an unofficial memorial, a reminder of a young life cut short and questions that remain unanswered. But it is also something more, a symbol of America's unfinished business with race, a testament to the work that still needs to be done to create a truly just and equal society. Trey Reed's death may have been intended to spread fear and division, but it has also sparked a movement for truth and accountability that refuses to be silenced. His family's fight for justice has become more than just a search for answers about their son's death. It has become a battle for the soul of America itself, a test of whether this country can finally confront its history of racial violence and move beyond it. Their courage in demanding answers, in refusing to accept easy explanations, in insisting that Black lives matter as much as any others, represents the best of what America can be. The investigation continues. The questions remain. And somewhere in the shadows of American politics, the forces that may have killed Trey Reed are still at work, still spreading their poison through college campuses and online forums, still recruiting young people to their cause of hate. But they face something they haven't encountered before. A family that won't be silenced, a community that won't be intimidated, and a nation that is finally beginning to understand that the price of freedom is eternal vigilance against those who would use violence to maintain their power. Trey Reed's story is not over. His death may have silenced his voice, but it has amplified the voices of those who demand justice, who refuse to accept that young Black men should die simply for existing, for pursuing their dreams, for believing in the promise of America. In that sense, his legacy may be more powerful than his life, a catalyst for change, a call to action, a reminder that the fight for racial justice is far from finished. The tree where he died stands as a monument not just to his death, but to the ongoing struggle for equality and justice in America. The investigation continues. The truth awaits. And America watches to see whether it will finally live up to its highest ideals or continue to be haunted by the ghosts of its darkest chapters. Thank you for listening to this episode of No Tears for Black Girls. If you enjoyed today's story, Please show your support by hitting that like button, leaving a comment, or giving us a 5-star rating and review. It really helps us reach more listeners who need to hear these important stories. Coming up next, we have an exclusive track from our upcoming No Tears for Black Girls music compilation, Conspiracy by Fly Money. This song connects directly to the themes we've been exploring today. Until next time, remember to stay loved, stay blessed, and stay safe. We'll see you in the next episode. This is Samantha Paul.
Yeah. They seek is jealousy. Yeah, they say black excellence always come at a cost. Moments in the spotlight just before they get lost. Heard it in the whisper, seen it in the news. Fame ain't protection, it's a target, win or lose. Before you judge a story, better study who's narrating. Peep the hidden hands and the traps they creating. History repeats, legends fall, some never rise. Open up your eyes, see the truth behind the lies. Lights, camera, action, but what's really on the screen? They sold us dreams, then twisted up the scene. Diddy in the news, rumors start to swirl. Kel's in a cell, now it's justice, or is it just the world? Names in the headlines, but who's pulling strings? Who profits from the stories when the cage bird sings? Pop gone, Biggie gone, Nipsey in the streets. Legends dropping, all we get is hashtags and tweets. Another king falls and they chalk it to the game. But if you dig a little deeper, only black men get the blame. Success is a crime, Eddie Griffin was in line. If you make it out the mud, they'll drag you back trying. It's a conspiracy, they want us in chains. Build you up, then they tear down your name. Crime, smother blood, pick your stain. Famous and black, they running that game. Hollywood lights, but the shadow's the truth. Try to leave clean, but they after your roots. They don't wanna see a king reign free. It's a conspiracy, yeah, it's a conspiracy. Yeah. Look, power in the pen, but it's poison in the deal. See a brother make $1 million, now they coming for his will. They question every move, every friend that you choose. Plan a scandal in the news, now watch the world get confused. From Malcolm to Cosby, from Cosby to Ye, from Michael to Prince, they all fade the same way. Is it just mistakes or a pattern in the fall? Every time a black star rise, they wanna see him crawl. From Oscar to cell block, Grammy to grave. It's a cycle, it's a trap. Are you not entertained? Check the playbook, who wrote these lines? The bigger the spotlight, the deeper the fines. It's a conspiracy, they want us in chains. Build you up, then they tear down your name. Crime, smother blood, pick your stain. Famous and black, they running that game. Hollywood lights, but the shadow's the truth. Try to leave clean, but they after your roots. They don't wanna see a king reign free. It's a conspiracy, yeah, it's a conspiracy.